The Battle of Ypres. Ypres was a key strategic town in Belgium, especially for the British. It was the gateway to the north and thus to Britain. Canadian troops were deployed in the front line, and they provided their endurance and dependability in combat to the Allies. 6,000 Canadian lives were lost in the battle in April 1915. First gas attack. April 22nd, 1915 at Ypres came the first gas attack in history. 5,730 cylinders of chlorine were opened by the Germans in favorable winds. Chlorine gas causes burns to the eyes, skins, and lungs, even through clothes and rubber boots. The effects were devastating. The only defense found by the Canadians was to cover their noses with urine-soaked handkerchiefs. Zeppelin bombardment. Zeppelins were invented in the 1900s by the German Count von Zeppelin, but the first long-distance flight didn't take place until 1908. Zeppelins weren't much slower than the aircraft of the period and were first used in reconnaissance. They could also fly at higher altitudes, so from 1915 they were used to bomb civilians in London and Paris. The Dogs of War. It is estimated that by 1918 the Germans had employed 30,000 dogs, while the Allies employed 20,000 dogs. Were recruited from the dog pounds and the police force. While many families also enlisted their pets, dogs had a number of roles as sentries and scouts in postal liaison and equipment transport, in locating casualties and explosives, and as mascots. The main breeds deployed were German Shepherds, Doberman Pinschers, and Bouviers.
On April 22nd, 1915, chlorine gas was used for the first time by the Germans.
Vas-y. Go, go, go! What? Baba.
Canadian Identification Tag. At the start of the war, Canadian identification tags were formed by a large aluminum disc, which was because they were an emergency issue and had unique shape. They were soon replaced by standard British tags, as were those of all British Empire forces.
What? Allez. Allez. Vas-y.
Sometimes there's things hidden behind other things. urine-soaked cloth. The only defense against a gas attack before masks were introduced was to cover the nose with a urine-soaked handkerchief. Urine reacts with chlorine directly in the handkerchief to form less noxious products, limiting the effects. It was not the most hygienic solution, but it was always better than a lung full of hydrochloric acid.
What? What? Hey, back. What? Hey. Hey, what? What? Come on, man. Emil, let's go.
Back that I could pick up.
We most.
Good dog. What's this?
What? What?
Uh-huh. Letter from a Canadian soldier, 21st of April 1915. Dear parents, we are in Belgium, a truly flat land that reminds me of our Winnipeg plains. The big difference is that it's so damp here, which makes the cold even colder. The guys and I are going to make you proud of us. The Canadians will be the big heroes of this war. I'll write again soon. Stephen. Uh-oh. They're dropping more chlorine. Gas canister deployment strategy. Gas canister deployment strategies were simple, but they did depend on the weather, especially on wind. Gas use required a constant downwind towards enemy lines to avoid the gas returning to its sender. Any battle plans were therefore dependent on the weather forecast.
Emil, hurry up! What? That is.
Belgian Shanko. The Belgian army's distinctive Shanko resembled a top hat with a rim replaced by a visor. The Shanko was replaced by the Yars cap, a soft cap with flaps that could be pulled down over the ears. The cap was called the Yars because Belgian soldiers massed behind the river Yars to hold off the German advance.
What? Mama. Help me, Emil! What? Hey. What? Ah.
I don't think a bone could replace a lever, but maybe.
Thank you, my friend. You ready? Don't worry.
Pocket watch. Time was an important factor in soldiers' lives, and military strategies for attacks and rolling barrages were based on tight chronological synchronicity. Pocket watches were the only way to tell the time.
Her name was Anna, a Belgian student living in Paris. She was hard on the trail of her missing father. For once, fate smiled on them. They were all going in the same direction. But while approaching Vimy, a German squadron spotted them.